Ladies and gentlemen, our special guest today first came to my attention via a viral post on LinkedIn, a photograph of his frostbitten fingers from his recent expedition to Antarctica, accompanied by an emotional and inspiring post detailing how people who didn't understand him would say things like, "You're not as strong as other people. You have a genetic problem, so you shouldn't be taking risks like these." This post ended with a powerful line, something that stuck with me. It said, "Don't change the dream, change the plan. Don't change the dream, change the plan, and then fight with all your might to make it happen." Our special guest today is Akshay Nanavati, who's a Marine Corps war veteran, polar explorer, entrepreneur, and author of a book titled Fearvana. He has overcome and struggled with drug addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder from fighting the war in Iraq with the Marines, where one of his jobs was to walk in front of vehicles to find bombs. He has overcome depression and alcoholism that pushed him to the brink of suicide. He has bounced back and built a global business now. And despite certain medical conditions, he has become a sponsored athlete and adventurer, explored the most hostile environments on this planet, from mountains to caves to polar ice caps. He's been featured on media outlets such as CNN, Forbes, Entrepreneur.com, Fast Company, etc. Combining his life experience with years of research in science and spirituality, he wrote the book Fearvana, the revolutionary science of how to turn fear into health, wealth, and happiness. And he's now on a mission to help the human family, you and me, all of us, to build a positive relationship to suffering and fear in order to create a life of greater meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. Akshay, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Simerjeet. Pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure. Your posts, your story, your journey is absolutely awe-inspiring. I saw your photo with the frostbite on the fingers. You mentioned you had a blood disorder that transports significantly less oxygen in your body than a normal person, about 25 to 30% less. And yet you've been taking all these risks, while people were telling you you're not built for them, you shouldn't do it. Actually, one of the first questions I would like to begin with today is for our viewers who might be struggling with their own fears, who might be held back by their own imaginary demons. Why would you risk life and limb to go out on expeditions such as these and take these risks? What's the message here for all of us?
At the deeper question, I guess, ultimately is sort of why do anything in life, right? Like, why are we here? What's the greater meaning? And if I had to summarize the essence of life in one word, I would say it's self-transcendence. And why I go out there and do these things on the edge is because of the transcendence it gives me. So when I play on these extreme edges, I suffer. It's suffering a great deal. When I'm in Antarctica, clearly there's consequences. When I run ultra marathons, the level of suffering is intense. But why I go is not for the suffering itself. The suffering is the means, not the purpose. The thing I go for is what the suffering gives you, and that is the transcendence. Right. When you discover something within yourself to transcend that suffering, to move past it, and to still keep taking that next step forward, you are tapping into the essence of the human soul at its finest. And I don't just mean like I discover something within myself, but more importantly, you're discovering something within the human spirit. Collectively, we all have that within us. And tapping into that is why I go. Discovering that, like you start to recognize how truly powerful we are as human beings. And that is... it's magnificent. I mean, and it's an experience of God, and it's an experience of the divine, When you're out there, like, life is amplified in every way, everything. So you feel the intensity of life at such a high level, and it means the highs are higher, but the lows are also lower. So you feel everything that much more intensely. So this aliveness you feel, the transcendence, it makes, I mean, we all ultimately are seeking growth in our own way, right? Like, in whatever way. It doesn't have to be going to Antarctica or doing these things on the very edge of the human condition. But the farther you push, the deeper you go into the human soul, and you go into these spaces, you open new doors within that give you access to treasures that you would never find unless you first confront those demons, unless you go so hard onto the edge. And why I go is for those treasures, what I find on the other side of myself when I confront myself through the deepest, darkest spaces into in the human soul. And it's a profound, addictive, and very humbling, very awe-inspiring, very human journey.
I'm sure it is. And this is self-inflicted. It's not like you don't have to do this. You choose to do this.
Exactly.
And as you rightly said, it pushes you. You have experiences that one wouldn't normally have in one's comfort zones, right? So goes contrary to what we've been taught about, that human beings, we run towards pleasure and avoid
Yeah.
pain. You are
Yeah.
going against the tide here, my friend. You are swimming against the
Very
tide,
much so.
right? In order to experience that. How are the fingers, by the way? How are the fingers?
They're recovering slowly. In fact, this one, the bandages keep falling off, so I can actually show it
Oops.
to you.
Right.
Forgive the
Oh my
gesture,
God.
but you
Okay.
can
That.
see it's quite
Yeah.
gnarly.
Uh-huh.
It's quite the bandage has been coming off today. So, but yeah, so it's a process. It's a long journey to recover. But I'll be back out there soon enough. As soon as while I was on the evacuation flight after getting frostbite, I was
Uh-huh.
planning my return to Antarctica.
You
And to
were.
your point, since that, like people have told me, you're stupid, you're crazy. Why would you go back out there? What is wrong with you? I get that all the time. But the thing is, we all fall in life, and it's not
Yeah.
about the fall. Like as you mentioned earlier, like I said, don't change the dream, change the plan. This has changed my plan on how I got to approach the mission. But the results and the things I seek are still the same. And if you're going to play
Absolutely.
hard on the edges, you're going to get hurt. Well, the farther out you play on the edge, I mean, you take a risk, there's consequences. You can
Absolutely.
get hurt. And I play in
Absolutely.
some very dangerous worlds. So inevitably there's consequences, but it's worth it. I mean, the price you pay is a small one for the treasures I gain, for the rewards I get from such life experiences. And I also have another scar here. It's a wind burn from Antarctica. I can see there's a slight one here too. And this, Antarctica kind of beat me up here. So it was pretty
but
brutal.
you're proud of it. I mean, is this like the trophy of, and you're an inspiration to so many.
Thank you.
Yes,
These are worthy
because-
battle scars of a life well lived.
Absolutely, and people who say that you shouldn't be doing this, they don't fully understand you. It's a failure of understanding. It's not you who's wrong. It's them falling short in their understanding of what message you're trying to convey here. You can say it through wonderful words and through something that I do for a living, or writing a book, or through feats of exploration and pushing the limits that you're undertaking. And what I've sensed is actually in our conversation thus far is you've spoken twice about going back out there, and this is tell us about the role of this what's next in your life. Is that a pull? What's the pull to get you back in there? The what's next, the next mission, is that one of the driving forces? I mean, despite all these challenges and what you've ended up with and all the threat.
It's a constant evolution. Like we never fully arrive, right? Whatever the thing we seek, there is never an arrival. Like the ultimate final destination is death. And until that moment arrives, there's always more life to be experienced. There's always more growth to be had. There's always more to serve. There's always more joy to be experienced. And so why the constant next mission is that, it's like this duality you play with. The next mission is the target. But once I have that target, it lives in the back of my mind. And the world is the next inch in front of you to get to that target. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, what's the next mission? How do I train for it? What do I have to do today? Because training for these absolutely insane feats of human endurance, like this year, I'll be going back for 40 days solo in Antarctica. And that's a daunting mission to be solo, completely
I'm sure. I mean,
isolated in Antarctica.
I can only theoretically think about it. The coldest mission I've been on is shaving with cold water with a shaving gel. That's called icy shaving gel. That's about as far as I can go, my friend. So yeah.
So but I mean, brutal in its own way. So, but getting out there, that's the target. But what's going to get me there is the constant day to day of preparing for it. So I have the target becomes your compass. It's your North Star. It's your guiding post to give you direction, to give this life meaning. And we all have our own version of it, but the target then lives in the back of the mind. Like a fundamental misconception in how we approach life and how we approach joy and happiness is this idea that when I get there, whatever the there is, when I reach that target, then I'll be happy. And in fact, kind of ironically, when I do these things I do, when you actually reach the destination, it's very anticlimactic. When you get to the summit, when you think it's like, oh, now it's over. Now what? It's the preparation. It's the work, the grind, the evolution that happens on the journey that is where the real transformation lies. The target is just the signpost, that you follow. But that's the key thing. It's like it's not about it's not like you're never going to get there, arrive, and you'll finally be happy and all problems go away. You know, kind of, you were touching on this earlier, as human beings, we're wired to seek pleasure. And that's true because evolutionary speaking, we lived in a world where stressors were normal, where our lives were constantly threatened, right? In an archaic world, our brain is still designed for that. So we sought out comfort because comfort was not the norm, because we were constantly worried about survival. We no longer live in that world. And we live in a world where we have excess and comfort.
And yet we've inherited the fears.
Sorry, go ahead.
And yet we inherited the fears from that. There's still...
Exactly. Yeah. Because our brain is still designed for that archaic world. You know, our brain is that kind of caveman, cavewoman like brain. And so that's why we're more miserable than ever before, because we're not designed for it. Like comfort and excess is not going to give you the thing you want. And believe me, like, I could live my entire life in luxury and opulence, not doing any of this, but it is a miserable way to live, because, as I always like to say, if you don't seek out a worthy struggle will find you anyway. So it's in that process that we get something we've never gotten before. Because if you want to experience more out of life, and experience more means more success, more joy, more wealth, more relations, like more anything, you're going to have to do something you've never done before. And that means stepping beyond what you know about the world, stepping out onto the edge. And out on those edge, you're going to find something within yourself about how far you can really go. And that discovery is it's the spiritual, it's transcendence, it's the spiritual evolution. It's why I believe one of the core reasons and even research has shown, like, that's one of the core things that makes us happy is that pushing ourselves. So it's kind of this really paradoxical thing that we seek comfort, yet we also seek novelty. And the thing about seeking novelty and going outside our comfort zone, it is uncomfortable. It's hard. It's suffering. It's pain. It's adversity. And there's no way around that. You got to play in the arena to build a comfort zone with it. I wasn't always like this. When I was a kid, I used to be scared of Ferris wheels, scared of roller coasters. So I was in no way sort of born this person doing the things I do. I built this self and cultivated this self-identity through relentless amounts of hard work and pushing the line very systematically, 1 inch at a time.
Which is remarkable, because a lot of people, I think Paulo Coelho wrote in one of his books, he said, a lot of people are afraid of change. And they would rather be in their comfort zone, because even if it's miserable today, even if it's miserable, a lot of people would prefer, I'm fine, because they are more afraid of the uncertainty of what might happen in case they change something. And then they spend their lives in what one of the authors called quiet desperation, desperation. And I know there's a pandemic out there for COVID-19. There's another pandemic out there for disengagement. They're disengaged youngsters. In India, we have one of the maximum youth suicide rates in the world. There's disengaged workers in corporate workplaces. We have several people who do not like their jobs. There's 10 Gallup numbers last time I read the survey. The number of engaged employees at the workplace was less than 10%. So 10% people actually love and enjoy their job and push things forward. 90%, they just show up for the money and for other things. And no wonder, no surprises that we end up with a society where there are issues like depression and things we haven't heard about before, Akshay, in this society. Rewind back in India 40, 50 years, it was a different social sort of setup in terms people were more satisfied with what they had. Mental health, emotional health, these things were unheard of. They were there, but not to the proportions which we are seeking today. I love what you said about that when you arrive at the destination is just is probably does not live up to your expectations and the anti-climax, right? And then you set on the next mission. I think a powerful life lesson there, Akshay, because a lot of us, we just hold everything back for the destination and think that once we get there, I could just sit back, relax, be on the beach. I meet young entrepreneurs who say, I would like to retire by 35. I want to be a billionaire by 35 and then retire. I said, what? Do you think a person with your kind of restless energy and creativity is just going to sit on the beach with a martini in his hand at 35 and not do anything? Wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's really missing the point. And I know, and again, we live in a world that cultivates that identity, that desire, that we think that's what the dream is. But I can promise you, if you sit around doing nothing at 35, you are going to be far more miserable than you can possibly imagine. It's the quest that makes that makes the journey worthwhile. And to your point, like you said, we're afraid of change because there's that saying, the devil is greater than the devil you don't. So I'll
Right.
stay in this misery, in this
Uh-huh.
disengagement, because the other thing could be even more scary. And
Yep.
so many of us live our lives in this kind of static middle ground, in that quiet desperation, because we're so afraid of the lows that we're not
Yeah.
willing to risk playing the highs. And that's
Yep.
why I talked about, why I go out to these experiences on Antarctica and climbing mountains is they become a microcosm for the entire human experience, right?
Indeed.
In this one section of time, I
Yep.
get to experience intense highs and intense lows. But that's the thing of life is you cannot have a summit without a valley. Otherwise,
Wow.
everything is flat terrain. In order to have a high, you must have a low. And people are often unwilling to, thank you. They're unwilling to risk that high because they're afraid of the low. And I can promise you the lows are going to be dark. It's not that I'm magically perfect now. Like my lows are intense, not just out there. When I came back from Antarctica, I struggled with the transition back into this world, So, but even then I would never change a thing, because even the lows, there is the beauty in the pain. That's why, again, when I go out there, the lows that I feel are so dark, but in those spaces that you find something, you find your ability to, and you have to go there. You have to go to war with yourself to know how strong you really are. Like
Absolutely.
struggle, like strength is only built through struggle. Pain is what gives us power. Fear, we can't have courage without fear. We need to have fear in order to know the courage to transcend that fear. I've often heard people say like fear and courage are two opposite things. And that's a deeply flawed ideal. Like it takes no courage for me to sit on a couch and watch a movie, right? It takes courage when I am scared of the thing and face that thing. So you have to know, you have to go through pain to know your power. You have to go through struggle to tap into your strength. You have to experience fear to know your courage. And that self-discovery is what breeds confidence. It's what breeds resilience. It's what breeds the evolution of the self that ultimately creates greater joy and fulfillment and bliss in the day-to-day content of this human experience.
Indeed, and that's beautiful, so powerful. I was just allowing, with my eyes closed, to allow to all of that information to sink in. I request everybody who's watching or listening to do the same, perhaps listen to it all over again, because there's some profound wisdom in what you just said, Akshay. And I love the part you said, there's no courage involved in consuming, and whether it's information or entertainment or other things, there's courage involved in stepping outside the comfort zone. I always think about this. I joke with my team when we talk about creating new content or videos. I say consumption is easier, creation is harder, because
Absolutely.
consumption is passive, right? Somebody else created it, worked hard on it. Now you can sit back, relax, and enjoy it. Yeah. Creation, you're vulnerable. There's that fear that what if this goes wrong? What if it doesn't live up to the expectations of the people that I'm creating it for? And yet the joy of existence is in creation. And I see so many of us are just sleepwalking through life, just consuming, just mesmerized, hypnotized by this society of this whole lifestyle of consumerism. We interviewed a wonderful gentleman, Joshua, who speaks about minimalism, and he's a global thought leader on that. And I loved his views again on about decluttering and keeping your life simple. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of, it's interesting how all these different viewpoints, they come together and you can tie them in a single knot. They're all interconnected. Joshua talking about decluttering and you talking about pushing your boundaries. And so very powerful stuff there, Akshay. I'm really thankful you're sharing all that very openly with us. I want to first know your rituals, your mindset hacks, because what you've achieved must require incredible self-discipline, incredible, powerful conversations with yourself. I'm sure you must be in a situation, your part of you might be, do you really want to do this? Or how do you overcome that? That's one. Yeah. And because as it is, modern generations, youngsters especially, stillness, sitting still, focusing on something, leaving the phone for more than 20 minutes. There's actually a word now. There's a phobia called nomophobia. It's the fear of being out of touch with your mobile phone. That's the world we live in, right? And there you are on the other end of it, leaving technology and connections and all of these things behind and going out there and challenging your limits. Talk to us about your rituals, about your mindset hacks, about what helps you stay on track after you undertake such risky expeditions.
Sure. Yeah. Cultivating systems to systematize all areas of my life has been invaluable. And I'll get to self-talk in a second because you can even kind of systematize the mind. But let me start with that because the thing is, every time you make a decision, it's called decision fatigue or willpower depletion. So when you wake up in the morning, and if the first thing you're asking yourself, okay, like as a very simplistic example, what should I eat for breakfast today? What should I do today? And we're always thinking about like trying to make these decisions. You're wasting cognitive energy. So as much as possible, I systematize my life so I don't have to think about what to do. I just do it. The plan is laid out. So I use thinking to create a plan, and then I eliminate thinking because I just follow the plan, right? And the plan that when I do that, so when I systematize my diet, for example, eat the same thing every day, have a clear rituals, have clear structures that I follow. People often think when I say structures and systems, it's like imprisoning. Oh, I just want to be spontaneous. And look, I'm not saying don't be spontaneous if you want to embrace that, but you can systematize spontaneity in the sense that like true freedom comes in structure and discipline, because if you don't have that structure, you are a slave to your feelings. And we are going to do, the mind is naturally lazy. We are going to do the laziest, easiest course of action. So if we don't have a clear plan to guide us, we're going to retreat to the laziest, easiest course, right? So what I mean by that is like I systematize all areas of my life, from a morning ritual to a night ritual to my diets, and that way I can save my cognitive and physical energy for the battle at hand, for the fight, because the things I pursue are very, very hard, right? So I need my energy for the pursuit, and everything else I don't want to think about. And this is why you see people like, the Steve Jobs or like the Barack Obama, many successful people, they wear the same shirts every day or the same clothes because they're not thinking about that. Yeah, there you go. Same thing, right? You don't have to think about it. I don't have to think, what should I wear today? And I'm going through this whole internal dialogue about these small things. So let the small things sort themselves out and let everything else then you can focus on your mission. Now, focusing on your mission, it's really important to have clarity on what is your worthy struggle. And your worthy struggle is really important. Not what your parents said you should do, not what the world said you should do, especially important in India, as we know, man. Like in India, right? Parents will say, this is your path. And I mean, when people see, I can't tell you how often I get it. Like when people see a successful Indian, they think engineer, doctor, or IT, right? And I'm like, not any of those things. Because, and then the thing is, I think so many people are forced into these, or not like, they're pushed into this path because the world tells them that's who they should be. Their parents tells them, and inevitably they're miserable. So you got to find your own worthy struggle. And I call it your worthy struggle specifically because I don't like that term, follow your passion, which young people often hear. Passion for what you do is a good thing, but follow your passion often has this idea that if I love what I do, I'll never work a day in my life. If I follow my passion, it'll all be sunshine and rainbows and unicorns. And that is far from true. Like life will be brutal. You will struggle. But that's why I call it your worthy struggle. It doesn't have to be skiing in Antarctica, climbing mountains. It could be writing a book, building a business, raising a child, playing chess, playing basketball, whatever it may be. Find your worthy struggle and then commit your soul to it. You're going to suffer on the path. That's okay. So confidence is built through two ways. One is what I've been talking about. You got to push your edge systematically. And systematically is key. If you go too far, like you don't come from couch to climbing Everest overnight, or you're going to fail and it's going to be too much. Like again, I didn't do this. I wasn't skiing in Antarctica overnight, right? I came from being scared of a Ferris wheel to slowly pushing my edge one step at a time till that zone, I call it the zone of Fearvana. It expands 1 inch and 1 inch and 1 inch, and you can keep going further. But there's a second part to building confidence. It's not just pushing yourself. It's what you say to yourself when that thing is done. Because I used to be the kind of person when I would run 10 miles, I'd be pissed off I didn't run 15. I'd run 15, I'd be pissed off I didn't run 20. And I'm constantly pissed off. I'm constantly miserable. And I'm not cultivating that stronger self-identity. So it's doing the hard thing and then rewarding, like acknowledging yourself. And as human beings, we don't do this consciously. Cognitive biases, negativity bias, we always focus on what's wrong. We do it in others. We see companies do this. We only point out the flaws. We see parents do this. We only point out what their kids are doing wrong. And we do this to ourselves, right? We beat ourselves up all the time. So the key is when I now celebrate, like when I now finish, I'm pausing to acknowledge myself, celebrate the victory. What did I learn from this victory? Take it, and you're not resting on your laurels, right? But you're building that, you're cultivating that self-identity to take with you into that next battle. So how do I systematize self-talk? Because your question was, what are some of my rituals? I'm very, very conscious throughout the day of how I'm talking to myself. I'm not perfect, but like I use these statements. So for example, one very concrete example is, and I didn't come up with this myself, I learned it from a friend of mine who learned it from an Olympic gold medal winning athlete, Lanny Basham is his name. He wrote this book called With Winning in Mind. And what he does is to cultivate his self-identity, he will use these statements where he says, it is like me too. So he was a gold medal shooter. So he would say, it is like me to shoot a 10. It is like me to shoot a 10, and repeating these self-identity statements. So for example, one of mine will be, it is like me to never get tired and always operate with a beast-like level of energy.
Wow.
So I get tired a lot in the things that I do because I push the edge. And when I'm in that space, what I say to myself, I have to be so on point so I can keep rising, because I can easily go into this sucks, I'm exhausted, all this kind of stuff in my self-dialogue.
Negative
so
self-talk.
Exactly. I have to be so conscious about my self-dialogue. And that also, a big part of that is letting go of the judgments around your emotions. And this is fundamental in our self-dialogue, because what we often do is we don't, it's not just about the fear or the anxiety or the stress we feel. Those are very normal human emotions, right? Now, people will demonize them and say they're bad emotions, but they're not bad. They're just emotions. There are no bad or good emotions. They're only emotions. And it's up to us to decide what we do with them. So what happens is people will feel fear, and then they'll think there's something wrong with them for feeling fear. Like, concrete example, I worked with this client who was traveling to Iceland to go for a vacation by himself. And he was really scared. And then he would think, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I scared? Because he would look at things that I do and be like, you do all this crazy stuff, and I'm getting scared just going to Iceland for a normal vacation. But the thing is, my brain has developed references over time to say that this thing is not scary, but this thing is, because I've pushed the ladder of risk one step at a time. I've climbed it. His brain did not have those references yet. So it takes no courage on my part to travel Iceland alone, because I've done those things. So inevitably my edge is further. But his problem wasn't the fear. His problem was how he talked to himself about the fear. He thought of himself as weak. And because we hear this so often from people, like, be fearless. How many times do even parents do this to kids? And again, we're not doing it with bad intention, but it's human to say, don't be scared, don't stress out, don't worry. We always tell people, don't feel what you feel, right? And when they feel it, then they're like, oh, I should not feel it. And we go down this spiral of this kind of negative, destructive self-talk, instead of saying something like pausing, just standard mindfulness and awareness. Okay, I'm feeling fear. Great. The fear is cool. Let it be there. Now, what do I say to myself in the face of that fear? Like, I get scared doing everything I do. I'm not fearless by any means, right? I get terrified doing these things, but I'm able to be comfortable with the experience of that fear. And so when I'm in these places of fear, and especially the quote unquote pain cave that I call it, when you're like deep in these spaces of horrible pain, when you're, running a 24-hour run, or when I'm in Antarctica on a 10-hour day, or places like this, I have to constantly bring the awareness back on how I'm going to talk to myself. And the thing with this is that inner dialogue, that battle is relentless. It is relentless. This is what makes it so hard for people, is you don't magically do it one day and then it stops. Like, you'll get to a point where certain things become habitual. Like, now I'm obviously pretty good, but believe me, I still get moments where I'll find myself getting beat up thinking, how am I ever going to achieve this? I'll go into kind of negative talk, and then I have to pause. And now I'm really good at like the speed between when that, disempowering, I won't say negative because there's no bad or good or negative, but when the disempowering thought or feeling shows up, I'm really good now at reducing the time it takes to transform that into an empowering one. But the point is, that stuff still shows up. And I've just gotten really good at saying, all right, cool, you can do its thing. Like, my thoughts and brain can go where it goes, but I am not my mind. I am not my thoughts, right? Like, one of my core mantras that I use all the time is, we are not our thoughts. We are not our feelings. We are not our experiences.
Right.
We are the thinker of our thoughts, the feeler of our feelings, and the experiencer of our experiences.
Wow.
So there is a space between what shows up and who we choose to be outside of that thing. And that space will shape our destiny. But the core of it is to acknowledge that we don't control most of what happens in our brain. Like, right now, if I'm sitting in this room and somebody comes in with a gun, I will feel fear. My brain's going to respond with fear. I'm not choosing that emotion. So the fear is not the problem. Most of what happens, and neuroscience has shown this, spirituality has shown this, they've literally done brain scans to show that we don't control most of what happens in our brain. Our point of control is what we do once that thing shows up. And that requires that awareness. It requires constant training. And a really useful tactic to do that is to talk out loud to yourself. Like, if there was cameras following me, I'd look like a crazy person. Like, when I go running, I'm mumbling to myself. When I'm at home, like, I'm talking out loud to myself. When I was in my tent in Antarctica, I'd be talking out loud to myself about setting up my systems. Because when you talk out loud, you're bringing your kind of focus to your thoughts, and you're hearing that, and you can now reinforce a self-identity that is empowering and serving you. And you have to do this, and over time it becomes habitual till you start building yourself into someone better and stronger to keep taking on that next fight. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And very powerful, and reminded me of a philosophy I read somewhere, which goes something like this: learn to rescue yourself. Because what if the person that you so hopeful about that is going to show up to rescue you doesn't turn up? Right. So you got to learn to rescue yourself. So if it's self-talk for you, talking out loud, it could be just a mindful internal conversation for me or for another person. But it's important, as you shared your mechanisms, to have a mechanism where you're self-dependent, self-reliant, to pull yourself out of your darkest moments, because that you might not have another person who could understand the gravity of what you're into or why you're doing this, as you already said. So if you're accompanied by another person, for example, hypothetically speaking, who was against your idea of the expedition in the first place, given your medical situation and the dangers involved, and then something goes wrong, what are the chances this person is going to volunteer to help? Zero, right? It is going to be a wonderful moment for that person to say, listen, I told you, don't do this. And you mentioned Indian families and kids trying, turning entrepreneurs and things like that, leaving their jobs and doing other things. There's that, you have to tread on that path very carefully, because there's a moment that if things go wrong, you're going to turn back, your family's going to tell you, listen, I told you, don't leave that job, son. I told you not to leave that job, right? Put your head down, work, retire, get married. No, you get married first and then you retire. So follow the sequence. And in case you choose to, march to the beat of a different drum and something goes wrong, and it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for them to say, listen, I told you that. So in that situation, in which we will all face in different magnitudes, in different circumstances, we will face situations like that. As you rightly said, we need to learn to have a mechanism that works for us to pull ourselves out of that. Akshay, I want to rewind back now a little. We know the Akshay today who's challenging the limitations, who's doing all these incredible things, who's an inspiration to so many, including myself, after I've listened to what you've said and heard your story. But talk to us about your journey. I understand you were born in India, and then you moved to Singapore, and then you talk to us about what were the influences, the good and bad, the learning points that our viewers, especially the youngsters, are prone to falling into those traps, and what words of wisdom or inspiration would you offer them to be on the right track?
Sure. Yeah. So a little bit about my journey. As you said, I was born in India, moved to Singapore, and then I moved to the US at the age of 13. So I'd moved from Bombay to Bangalore to Singapore to Austin, Texas, because my dad's job took us around. So when I moved to Austin at the age of 13, soon after that, about 15 years old, I got very heavily into drugs, into alcohol, into a lot of self-destruction.
This was while you were in the US?
In the US,
okay. Okay.
I have scars on my arm from cutting myself. I have this scar here from burning myself. And I was in this very self-destructive path. I see, the thing is, so my parents have always asked, because I had great parents, loving parents, could not have asked for a better childhood. What could they have done differently? But when I moved around, I wasn't very sure of myself. And because I moved around so much, I was very adaptable, but very impressionable. So I was always trying to do what to fit in. And I don't blame anybody else. I take responsibility for my life today. Right. But as a young child, you're very impressionable. And so I happened to sort of get into a group of friends where we got into drugs, and me being me, the same me that I am today, is I was the one pushing the line, right? So drugs was my vehicle for expression. So I was pushing the line as hard as possible. And I lost 2 friends to that lifestyle, me and one other friend who got into harder drugs. He OD'd, and I was heading down that path until when I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. You ever seen that movie?
I have. Yes.
That movie was the trigger that changed my life and got me out of the Marines. They're watching these men who would sacrifice their lives for another human being, and the kind of courage it took to do that voluntarily, putting themselves in a situation where they were vastly outnumbered and ultimately getting killed so somebody else could live. It triggered something in me that, what does it take for a human being to display that level of courage and compassion? Would I be able to do it? And that was the turning point. And, talking about other people telling you can't do something, I decided then, I stopped doing drugs, decided to join the Marines, but I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in Marine Corps boot camp. They said I wouldn't be able to survive in boot camp because of this. Obviously, I didn't listen, and obviously I survived, I not only survived, I thrived. I graduated infantry school as the honor graduate in my platoon. So the Marines is where I started to learn the beauty of suffering and adversity. But the thing is, coming back to the point of advice for younger generation, when you're young, it's okay if you don't know, you're not going to know all of the answers yet. And especially in today's world, I genuinely empathize with the younger generation, because when I grew up, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have these dopamine machines just triggering our brain and destroying it. You know, we didn't have this complex kind of world that they're growing up in. Even like my parents was even more simplistic than it was for me. And now it's getting so much more complicated. The environment is not conducive to our mental well-being. And not to mention, like, you also got to remember, the brain does not care about our happiness. It only cares about our survival. So to be successful in any definition of the word, physically successful, financially, mentally, spiritually, you have to combat these evolutionary constructs that aren't designed for today's world. So you literally have to do the thing that doesn't feel that normal. Like, it's going to be the counterintuitive thing, because again, you're combating constructs that are not designed to make you happy, you know? Right. So it's okay when you're young to feel a little lost. You're not going to know all your path, you know, but, and you're going to have to embrace the struggle of that. And you're going to have to go into, like, at the very core of it. And even sometimes when I've done talks in colleges, I'll openly say, my job here is not to motivate you. Like, I don't give a shit if you walk out of this room smiling. And it's a jarring thing to say to college students when I'm a quote unquote motivational speaker, right? But my goal is to give you tools to navigate the pain cave, because you will suffer when you step outside of my talk. And the fundamental problem with a lot of this sort of personal development and stuff, it's all designed to make you feel good in the moment. That's the problem. It's not about feeling good in the moment. It's about what you do when pain. We can all smile when life is going good. It's easy to feel grateful. What are you going to do when pain hits? Right. So for me, like, the key is on the younger, when you're younger too, is find a path, embrace it. And it's okay if it changes. Like, you can never be found unless you're lost first. It's being lost is okay. Being confused is okay. You're going to be a little lost. When I joined the Marines, I wanted to go career Marines originally. I'm going to spend my life in the Marines. That path changed. That path has I didn't know that this was who I wanted to be till I was in my mid-30s before I got clarity on my journey. So if you're one of those kids, like, I have friends who knew at a young age who they wanted to be. Like, one of my friends, she's about to be a grandmaster in chess, and she started playing when she was like 6 years old. If you are that, great. And if you're not, that's also okay. Because the journey, as I said, ultimately it doesn't matter where you get to in the end anyway, because the end is not where the destination is. The journey is the destination. The journey is the reward. And that sounds cliche, but it's like, think about it this way. Like, if I wanted to just get across Greenland, right? I dragged a 190-pound sled for 350 miles across Greenland. I could have theoretically drove across, but it's not about the summit. It's not about getting to the top of the mountain. It's not about reaching there. It's the person you become in the transformation. That's why lottery winners, for example, they not only lose most of their money rapidly, it doesn't improve the quality of their lives, because they haven't suffered to get that money. The evolution happens not in getting $1 million. It's going from 0 to 1 million, or whatever the number is. That's where the evolution happens, because you shift as a person to reach that destination, to go through the struggle. So it's really, for me, like, looking back now, is the Marines was the birthplace of finding the beauty in adversity and suffering, and recognizing that that's where the true bliss lies. I didn't have the level of self-awareness I had when I first joined the Marines, and now I recognize it. But everything about Fearvana and who I am today began there. You know, growing up in a comfortable Indian family, and many of my extended Indian family are very well off. They could live, like, comfortable lives, and they did, like, joining the Marines is what transformed me from staying in this sort of comfortable existence I could have almost lived in for the rest of my life, you know, in opulence and comfort. But through that, I found where true bliss lies, and it's on the other side of adversity. But you have to step into the arena. Like, you can listen to a podcast, you can listen to an interview, read a book, and great. Like, there can be insights that are invaluable, but you ultimately have to go to war with yourself to really get the lessons. And that's the thing that's so hard to do. Like, I did one interview once, final point, and I'll let you, I'll let you, you know, get back to it. But, like, I did an interview once where somebody asked me a specific scenario, saying, like, okay, if somebody's going through, let's say, a divorce, what would you tell that person? And I said, look, it doesn't matter what the scenario you paint for me, like college student, divorce, trying to get a job, do an ace an exam. It doesn't matter what the scenario. The fundamental problem is, we are looking for the easiest, quickest path out of the pain. Right. And that's the real problem. If you stop looking for the easiest, quickest path out of the pain, stop wishing for an easier life, and instead wish to be stronger, and instead embrace the pain, instead look out for the pain, and get to a point where you're not just embracing the pain, but, like I do, seek the pain. Seek that pain, your version of whatever it is. When you start doing that, that's where you will find the true bliss. Stop looking for the easiest, quickest path, because the more you seek easy, the more your life will be hard. The more you seek hard, the more your life will become easier in the process. But you have to go to war with yourself to do that. Initially, that'll be really hard, but the more you do it, the more you will develop a comfort with it, the more you will start to love it. Like, that's why, as I mentioned, the Marines birthed that in me, and now I do it all the time, because now I realize that's where bliss lies. That's where you find your growth, find your evolution, find what it truly means to be human. Wow.
I'd like to dwell on a couple of things that you just said, very profound. One was your brain is not designed for happiness, it's designed for survival. That was very insightful. And I think survival is easy, right? You just got to take care of your physical, biological needs and ta-da, job done. And I think that's where most people are, right? No risk taking, no challenging the limits, no stepping outside the comfort zone, and just basic survival, right? I don't know who the author was, but somebody said most people are busy existing, not living, right?
Yeah.
And so that was one. So which means that we need to take charge of our happiness. That existence can happen automatically or with minimal effort, but in order to be happy and fulfilled, you'll need to take charge. You'll need to take initiative. You'll need to take action. Not just consume more podcasts and books and videos and motivational talks and seminars because they feed on your insecurities.
Yeah.
They feed on your fears. They sort of, you feel that sense of validation and acceptance in that crowd out there in that seminar. At the end of that, whole thing, you need to, what you did, confront your fears and through that is going to be your growth journey. And the second thing that I really loved about what you just said is the person you become in the process. It's not about the reward, it's who you become in the process. 14 years of me doing what I'm doing now, Akshay, and before I was in the hospitality industry, we do have something in common there. I spent some time in Scottsdale, Arizona, I believe.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, I believe that's where you're based now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
I live there.
fantastic. Yeah, and that was my first job outside of Hotel School Sydney. Was the JW Marriott Camelback Inn, Scottsdale, Arizona. I was there for a year and a half. And so I spent 8 years in the hospitality industry, just like the explorer in me. I mean, not going, pushing it to those limits, but those were my limits. That was my worthy struggle. Traveling the world, working with different cultures, doing what probably my family is all doctors. All different specialities. So me going down this path was pushing the limits in a major way. And then moving to this entire new thing. And I think more than anything else, it's who I've become in the process. It's not, I haven't arrived somewhere. I doubt if there'll be a day when I can say, okay, this is where I wanted to be, X number of subscribers on YouTube or X number of followers on social media or, or book sales or whatever. It's who I've become in the process. The third thing, what I really like about what you just said is the movie Black Hawk Down. That was probably the trigger, the turning point. Maybe we cannot give it the entire credit because perhaps the upheaval was already happening inside you. Perhaps you were already looking for answers. But that, and I think that's so powerful in a way because that one movie can change your life, and one book can change your life, and one podcast can change your life because provided you're looking for answers, provided you're fed up with the way things are going at the moment.
Yeah.
So those were the three things that I just thought were worth capturing and just elaborating upon a little bit there. Akshay, I understand you battled with after you came back from the war in Iraq, and you battled with post-traumatic stress disorder and also depression and alcoholism to the brink of suicide. I lost a friend to suicide recently, just a week back. Somebody that I grew up with. Somebody who was a source of inspiration for me, somebody who was very energetic, incredible discipline, six packs, bodybuilder, I could have never imagined. And we would speak once a month or something, and I hadn't the faintest idea that something like this was going on in his mind. I don't think I'll ever be able to come to terms to, why he did what he did. Yeah. Words of inspiration, Akshay, from your experience. You're somebody who bounced back. You're somebody who probably had a positive internal self-dialogue, a positive internal conversation, which said, no, there's joy in life, there's meaning in life, and I'll find my worthy struggle. And I'm pretty sure, that's what the statistics say, there are people out there probably listening, watching, who need to hear what you have to say about bouncing back from the edges of depression and suicidal tendencies.
Yeah, I'm really sorry you experienced that. I've lost a few junior Marines of mine to suicide as well, and I know how dark that is. And the thing is, when you're in that space, like it's not the thing I hate. I wish it wasn't like this, but it is. it's not one aha moment that, I mean, like when I hit that rock bottom, that was the trigger that changed my life, you know, when I was on the verge of slitting my own wrist and started to climb out, but it wasn't a smooth climb by any means. It was a hard, like rocky, I drank again after that. I've broken my sobriety multiple times. It was like a hard, rocky path where you're clawing and fighting your way out of this abyss, you know? And to do that, the thing, like this is, again, I wish it wasn't like this, but the fact of the matter, it just is. To get out of the abyss, you have to go deeper into the abyss. And what I mean by that is you have to confront the darkness that is keeping you buried there. You cannot escape it, right? We talked a little bit about how we live in this world of distraction. And Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their own soul. And that is one of the core problems. As Blaise Pascal also said, that I firmly believe that all of humanity's problems stems from man's inability to sit by himself alone. And that is so true. I had to go into those spaces of darkness. I had to confront my survivor's guilt from the war. I lost a close friend of mine in the war. And I always felt like, why did I get to come back? You know, I found out in Iraq that my vehicle drove over an active bomb. And for some reason, it didn't explode.
Oh.
Why me? My friends drove over a bomb and he killed him. So why do I get to come back? And there are no answers to that question, right? Like I don't know. There is no answer. Some people will often say, oh, it's because you were meant to, but I refuse to accept that, because then what? He deserved to die? You know, so the point is to say there was no answer, but I had to go into those spaces and confront that. And the thing is, everybody told me, this is coming back to like the reframing right at the start. We talked about the developing positive relationship to suffering. See, when I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, I was struggling with survivor's guilt. I didn't like being in loud. I didn't like crowds. I didn't like loud noises. And all these things people told me, like the therapist, the doctor told me, these were symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But as I delved deeper into research after coming out of the darkness, I realized that these are not post-traumatic. This is not post-traumatic stress disorder. This is post-traumatic stress. But post-traumatic stress does not mean post-traumatic stress disorder. Like being jumpy with loud noises was a very normal human response to war, because my brain said loud noises can kill you. Inevitably, I was more hypervigilant than the normal person because I had that association. Same thing with crowds. The survivor's guilt was not the problem. Like everybody told me, don't feel guilty. It's not your fault. And rationally, I get it, right? Like war, you can't control where bullets fly. They fly where they fly. People get killed. Nobody can control that. Rationally, I got it. But emotionally, it didn't change the fact that I still felt guilty. And the thing is, everybody said, don't feel guilty. But the problem was guilt was not a bad emotion, as it's often framed. Guilt, fear, stress, anxiety. It wasn't a bad emotion. It was just a normal expression of love. Like the reason I felt guilt was because I had love for my brother, love for my brothers in arms, my comrades, right? So I learned to reframe that guilt. And actually what I did for a long time was I put a picture of my friend that I lost in the war up on my wall. And it said, this should have been you. Earn this life. And so my guilt became my ally. But that's a dark thing to look at, right? Like that's an intense thing to look at. But I had to go into those spaces to come out the other side. And that's what makes it so hard. Like if you're on those edges, if you're on that brink, you have to first confront the thing that's holding you there. And then you have to practice disidentifying with it. See, when I released, all I was talking about with disorder, right? Like when I started to accept that, for example, being jumpy with loud noises was just a normal human response to war. And I just said, look, there's nothing wrong with me, because attaching the word disorder onto it was the problem. And I'll give you like a concrete example of this. So I call this second dart syndrome. So Buddha once said, we are all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the one we don't control. So again, somebody comes into this room with a gun, I feel fear. I don't control that. That's the first dart. The second dart is what we do after that. It's that self-dialogue, right? Like I was saying earlier with this client I worked with, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling fear? I'm a piece of shit. The horrible self-talk we all go through, right? My problem was not the jumpy with loud noises. My problem was, yes, I had post-traumatic stress, but when I started to do this research, I started to remove the label disorder from myself and say, look, there's nothing wrong with me, because it was that label that fueled into this downward spiral of these second darts of suffering, where I started to beat myself up. What's wrong with me? You know, all this stuff, instead of just accepting the isness, right? Acceptance is so powerful. Accepting the isness of, okay, yeah, I'm a little jumpy. I have survivor's guilt. Great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a normal human response. I'm going to accept it and then disidentify from it, right? Like I said earlier, we are not our thoughts, emotions, and feelings. We're not our thoughts, feelings, and experiences. So disidentifying from it. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. It's very, very hard to do that. It's very, very hard because people will get identified with their thoughts. Like I've worked with so many people who say, I am depressed, I have depression. That becomes their self-identity. And then the world reinforces that because, look, the therapists I've worked with, good people, but as I came to learn, they're operating from bad playbook, as many are. And look, I'm not demonizing therapists, right? But in my experience, many good people, but just operating from bad playbook, meaning that they will say, oh, you have depression, diagnose you with all this shit. And the reality is, look, I can, like, my brain may be going through a state of depression from time to time, but I am not my brain, and my brain is not me. I will refuse to accept that label disorder. I will refuse to accept that label depression. I will acknowledge that it's there, but I will not identify with it, right? And so I had to first go into those dark spaces. I had to then disidentify from it. And over time, and it doesn't happen overnight, it's a constant, relentless battle. And as I said, I still fell. I still have low moments. Now I respond to them very differently than I did back then. But fact of the matter is, it's human to still have it. You just have to build these weapons, these tools to confront it. And some of these weapons are things like I'm talking about, the self-talk, creating joy triggers. You know, like paradoxically, on the one hand, going deeper into the darkness is very valuable. On the other hand, create joy triggers. What are things that make you happy? Write down a list. So sometimes when you're in a space of pain, go into joy triggers, right? Like, and both have its place. It sounds like I'm saying two opposite pieces of advice. And in some ways they are opposite, but both are important. You need to have a joy trigger. Like sometimes you just want to get out of the pain and feel joy. Other times you can, but you don't want to keep escaping the pain. You also want to have times where you confront it. Like Carl Jung also said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So you got to be willing to make that darkness conscious and then find the joy triggers, visualize the life you want to create, journal, meditate. These are all things that help, like the most valuable, and none of this is that profound or revolutionary, but the basics are foundational. One of the most valuable things you can do for yourself is exercise. Like one neuroscientist calls it miracle grow for the brain. Another neuroscientist said that if they could put the effects of exercise into a pill, it'd be the best-selling pill of all time. Right?
But they wouldn't, because the whole industry would collapse.
Exactly. But you have to do the work, and you have to do it every day. Like as one final example of this, just to make it more concrete, I was blessed to do this interview with Dr. Drew, and on the interview, somebody had called in and said they were going through some PTSD responses after the Boston bombing. And she was saying, we were kind of talking to her, guiding through her some stuff, and she was saying she feels anxiety when in certain scenarios. And I said, okay, the next time you feel it, I just want you to kind of pause and just be with that anxiety for a second. And something along those lines we were talking about. And then she said, yeah, but that's really hard. And I said, I know it's really hard, but you have to go through that. Like, and again, it's not against anything about her, but she wanted to get to the other side of PTSD or the post-traumatic stress without doing the hard thing. And I get it. It's normal because the hard thing is hard. That's the nature of hard. It's suffering. It sucks. And I said, you have to first be with that anxiety. It's going to feel horribly uncomfortable, but you get used to that. Be with it. And only by going into the darkness can you then find the light. Can you go on the other side of it? That's why I also do things like going into a darkness retreat. As you know, I spent 7 days in darkness. I'm going back into 10 days in darkness later, because being still with yourself, confronting those spaces will allow you to find the freedom through the other side of it. But if you don't go there, and I quote Carl Jung a lot, but one of his most profound quotes is, he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And that's what happens for so many of us. The unconscious directs our life because we don't go into those spaces. We don't battle those dragons to go into there, to open those doors, to see what shows up, and then bring it to the surface so we can now do something with it. Only by confronting my guilt could I then process it and use it as an ally. But I had to confront it to use it. Otherwise, it was controlling my life, and I was calling it fate.
Absolutely. There's no shortcuts out there, people. The message is loud and clear. There's no shortcuts. We got to stop looking for shortcuts. Stop looking for shortcuts to feel better, to be in better shape. It's going to take effort, and that's the whole point of it, right? The whole pursuit for shortcuts is what is what keeps us in that same loop, in that same cycle of self-harm and negative self-talk. It's when we push forward and understand that we have to go through this. We get queries for people, whether it's confronting irrational fears such as public speaking, or somebody's going through a massive fear for, he wants to start an entrepreneurial venture but is afraid to do so. And one of the quickest and easiest things to do is to search for more information. In the information age, it's so easy to do. Let me just go read up on this, or enroll for courses on it, or do all that research on it. And then at a sudden, Tony Robbins calls it the dance of denial. And I love that description. He said, imagine you have to write a book and there's a desk, there's paper, and there's a pencil, and there's solitude, right? And now you should write your book, right? But what most people would do is dance around that task, the dance of denial. Oh, I must make myself a coffee first, or I must do this. I postpone what really needs to be done. And I think that's one of the messages that I'm walking away with as well from this very deep conversation here, is that you've got to take action, which is going to be painful, which is going to be unsettling, the results of which are going to be uncertain, but you must take action, act on the advice that you listen to.
And a really powerful tool on that is to use the fear of consequences. Like when I was writing my book, I procrastinated. I'm not going to lie, writing a book was hard. So what helped me really finish is imagining myself dying, never having written a message. So there's the fear of writing the book, which was scary because, people, like you said, your creation is hard. People will judge you. What if I get that dreaded 1-star review on Amazon? All that kind of stuff. I mean, paradoxically, ironically, I'm writing a book about fear and I was terrified. And I'll openly admit that, of course. It was terrifying writing a book.
And you got the Dalai Lama to write the foreword for that, which is incredible, right? Right.
I was very blessed. That was great. That was a huge honor. But the thing is, what helped me really finish it was tapping into the fear of imagining myself dying, never having shared my message with the world. So whatever the thing that's scary, like the business, right, is imagine yourself living 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Imagine yourself on your deathbed, never having done that thing that you wanted to do. And I don't just mean sit there and think about it. I mean go deep into that visualization. Visualize yourself on your deathbed, feeling the consequences of never having taken action. And the more real you make that pain, because like you said, standard human psychology, we do more to avoid pain than to gain pleasure. So then why would I seek pain? Because to me, the pain of inaction is greater than the pain of action, right? So it's all about how we frame pain in our head. So when you start to look at the pain of inaction as more painful, you will take action. But you can activate that just through conscious effort.
Yes, and I think also that you got to take charge. You have to take charge of this entire processes, this internal dialogues, this what feeds your spirit, what lights you up. You must go out and do and schedule those things and prioritize those things. They should not be, okay, if I have time later on today, I'll probably go for a run or go to the gym or cook or go hiking or whatever gives me pleasure. That they must be on the top of your priority list, because at the end of the day, everything else depends upon that. If you're empty from within, there's nothing you can do to help yourself or somebody else. You're constantly dependent on others. And I'm not sure whether Carl Jung said this, but I read this somewhere. The heaviest load you can give to somebody else is the weight of your negative energy or your weakness or your illness or you not being fulfilled, because then you're constantly asking for something for others to fill you up, and that's a horrible place to be in. So to find that spot where it fills you up. Akshay, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. Before we let you go, you've mentioned spiritual practices and God and your meditation practices, etc. a couple of times in the conversation. I also read in your introduction. Talk to us about the role of spirituality, what role that might have played in this entire journey, bouncing back from the edge of suicide and depression to doing what you're doing today.
Everything that I do is deeply connected to this very spiritual pursuit of oneness. Oneness with mind, body, spirit alignment, oneness with all human beings, oneness with our role here on Earth. Like when you go to Antarctica, it is a very humbling experience. You see how small we are compared to the brutality, hostility, the unforgiving nature of, like a polar storm, for example, is one of the most savage, unforgiving environments a human being can endure. And you just see how small we are in that. And that is a very humbling spiritual experience, And for me, we all have God is a very heavy word, and that we all have our own version of what that word means. I don't personally believe in a sort of a higher power God. For me, God is the essence of the human spirit at its absolute finest. So God is an expression of a human being jumping on a grenade to save another human being. That to me is an expression of God. It's the divine. It's our ability. God is self-transcendence for me. So it's the true experience of transcending the self in service of something greater. And so for me, tapping into that has allowed me to give meaning to this life, and that's why I seek these things that I do. That's why I go back into 10 Days of Darkness. That's why I'm going back to Antarctica, is that spiritual pursuit of finding something deeper, because like I said, the journey never ends. There's constantly more growth to be had. And I don't know where it'll all take me. I don't know what I will find on the other end of 10 days in darkness. I have an experience of it because I spent 7, but this will be a new one. And I'm at a different level of consciousness today than when I was last time. So it's the spiritual search, like, I mean, as Maslow said, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The highest of needs is self-actualization. And actually it's not talked about as much, but actually the higher need even than self-actualization is self-transcendence. And as Viktor Frankl said, that self-actualization is a side effect of self-transcendence. And to me, self-transcendence is God. So everything I do, and to make this a formula, if you will, that suffering, why I seek suffering is that, and we talked about this to kind of tie a ribbon on everything that we talked about earlier, is that suffering is a training ground for self-transcendence.
Oh, wow.
Because it's like why when do people access God the most? When they're in pain, right?
Absolutely.
That's when they go to pray to God.
God,
and
Mom.
Yeah. And as we say, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And in the Marines we used to say there's no, or like it's often said in the military, there's no such thing as there's no atheists in foxholes. Because when you're in that depth of pain, you access God. And suffering is the training ground for self-transcendence, because you have to find something within the human spirit to transcend that suffering, and that transcendence is God. And that's why I invite everybody listening to go play on those edges, whatever those edges may mean for you, because in there you will find an expression of the divine, and you will find spiritual enlightenment. And I put that in quotes because I don't believe enlightenment is a destination, but you will experience moments of enlightenment that you will feel true oneness with all that is, and you will find yourself in a way that you've never discovered before. So go open those doors within. And the thing is, when you open those doors, you're not just opening doors to the light, you're also opening the doors to the darkness, right? Like there's another thing with sort of the dark side of meditation. People talk about meditation as a very calming thing, but when you sit still with yourself, you're opening doors to darkness, to your demons, not just your divinity, So, but go open those doors, bring it all to the surface, and you will find, you will discover the true bliss that is this human experience. And that's why I go do it. That's why I train in suffering to experience self-transcendence, because self-transcendence is an experience of the divine.
That is so profound. I really personally enjoyed listening to you. It had been a while since we did one of these interviews lately, because I was busy with other things, and I've been meditating, just closing my eyes, allowing all of those words to sink in. To whoever's watching or listening right now, I urge you to do the same. Go rewind this video or rewind the podcast and listen to it once again. Some important takeaways personally for me, Akshay, have been is to confront your fears. That was number one. And again, to find your worthy struggle, because that's when you find meaning. Is about the destination. Perhaps you won't be so excited when you get there. It's a journey that makes all the difference. And the next one was also what's next. Discover what's next for you, right? As you've already an exciting list of what's next on your list. You're going back out there, doing what you enjoy doing the most. We wish you all the very best on all of your expeditions. Keep posting those videos, those photographs. You're such an inspiration, and thank you so much once again for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.